Good
This is
evening.
stunning.
Welcome to the morning meeting, aka Real Estate Today, or not Real Estate, Travel Today. Right before the program started, I'm Mark Halperin, this is Sean and Dan. We were talking about the fact that the Russian delegation is staying at the Ritz in Riyadh, Ritz-Carlton, and I was curious how much a room costs at the Ritz in Riyadh, because I'm thinking if Putin lets the delegation keep its Bonvoy points, it's a gold mine. So Sean went on the Bonvoy app, again, right before we started.
The morning meeting brought to you by Expedia.
Listen,
Hopefully. No. How much is a one regular room one night at the Ritz-Carlton in Riyadh?
well, listen, I'm just going to say this. There's some several options of Marriott properties in the greater Riyadh area. However,
but I only want the Ritz because I want to be close to the Russian delegation.
Here's the lead up. To stay at the St. Regis, $6,271 tonight. To stay at the Marriott, $6,567 US tonight. But so that was the Marriott. How much do you think the Ritz is?
I'm going to say
$200 less, $6,300 tonight. You save $200 by going to the Ritz.
I think that's the story. Putin's making the delegation staying in the crap Ritz. Now, as Paul pointed out before we started, I think it was Paul who pointed out the hostage thing. Paul, was that you?
yes.
That Ritz is where, not you. Well, someone pointed out that Ritz is. Oh, Noah pointed out that Ritz is where the Saudi government has imprisoned its enemies at times. So great room service, great hummus from room service.
Can't stay at the 4-point Sheraton is much cheaper, $1,060. So
All right.
there are options.
Yeah, but they could be doing construction, like there could be renovations, like maybe that.
You never know. You never know. In any event, thank you for joining. The reason we're talking about Riyadh is because Riyadh is at the moment the center of the universe. At this hour, talks continue between delegation from the United States, led by Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, and the Russian foreign minister, and the Saudis are babysitting the whole thing. Zelensky isn't there, and the Europeans aren't there. We'll talk about that. Welcome in. This is the morning meeting where we talk about the days ahead. It's modeled off of the network news division's morning meetings, where they go around and talk about what's happening in the day book for that day, kick it around, and then the little surprise twist, we take your questions at the end. So if you want to be in on the conversation and you're here on the two-way platform, please raise your hand, not like this, but the electronic yellow one, as some people have already done. If you're new to the platform, we'd love to have you participate. It's only Tuesday, and we've already had new people, so thank you for that. If you're watching on YouTube or on X, you cannot participate in the conversation, but if you'd like to learn how to, go to twoway.tv, and you can learn how to be part of the conversation interactively rather than just passively watching your fellow citizens from around the country and around the world be able to interact with Dan and Sean. For many, a dream of a lifetime. For others, just another day in the two-way. All right, what's happening today? As I said, big talks in Riyadh right now. There have been no real updates. My general sense from looking at all the coverage and talking to someone on the Hill and someone in the administration is that they expect to come out of this a framework for talks, what's on the table. A lot of the focus is on what kind of military capability and security will Ukraine have in the wake of a deal. Obviously, there's territory issues. And then, of course, there's also the issue of Russian sanctions, Russia's place in the world after this, a lot of big issues. Many are speculating, I don't know how informed it is, that one thing that will come out of this is an agreement for President Putin and President Trump to meet somewhere soon to further the conversation. So we'll keep our eye on the Ukraine talks. President today has no public events until 4, when it's not a public event as of now. He's supposed to sign executive orders, close press. He's still down in Mar-a-Lago, so maybe they'll open that up. We'll see. At 9 tonight, the full interview of Donald Trump with side-by-side President Donald Trump with Sean Hannity with Elon Musk. They released a clip last week. Here's a new clip out this morning on Fox and Friends. Roll 101, please.
Now you're going to rescue astronauts, and now, and again, you do all of this. I would think liberals would love the fact that you have the biggest electric vehicle company in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I used to be adored by the left, you know.
Yeah, not anymore.
Less so these days.
He killed that, huh?
I mean, less.
I really did it.
Well, I mean, this whole sort of like, you know, they call it like Trump derangement syndrome. And I don't, you don't realize how real this is until you can't reason with people. So like I was at a friend's birthday party in LA, just a birthday dinner, and it was like a nice, quiet dinner, and everyone was behaving normally. And then I happened to mention, this is before the election, like a month or two before, I happened to mention the president's name. And it was like they got shot with a dart in the jugular that contained like methamphetamine and rabies, okay? And they're like, wow! And I'm like, what is wrong? Like, guys, like, you just can't have like a normal conversation.
Good way to think about the origins of Trump derangement syndrome, that it comes from methamphetamine and rabies cocktail. In any event, we'll talk about Doge in a moment. On Capitol Hill, the House is out. The Senate is working through the Lutnick nomination. He may be confirmed by sundown to be Commerce Secretary, and they're advancing procedurally Kash Patel's nomination to be the head of the FBI. In Gotham City today, maybe at this hour, couldn't pin down a time, the president or the mayor, the governor of New York is meeting with a bunch of prominent Democrats, federal and state of local officials, to decide what to do about the very big problem of Eric Adams, who is less likely to be mayor by November than he is to win re-election. I think I'm comfortable saying that. And Chuck Schumer is not there, and people are wondering why he's not participating. Hakeem Jeffries is reportedly, and some others. So we'll talk about that as well. All right, guys. Before we get to a lot of different,
if Hochul tries to remove him, do you think that there's backlash among? I mean, interestingly enough, I just sort of think about this whole talk about democracy and whatever, and the issues we keep talking about tit for tat. Hochul goes in and tries to remove the mayor of New York because she doesn't like the deal he cut, which we've discussed. I just wonder if there's backlash on the left about removing a black mayor from a white woman that's for a DEI party.
There will be, and he's already, if you look at his public events the last couple of days, he's already playing the race card. He would be replaced by a white official, and he's already playing that card. And there'd be some backlash. She's not a particularly adept politician, but she's trying to lay the groundwork to say she doesn't take it lightly, removing him. She's not a step she would take lightly, overturning the will of the voters. But it's more than just the deal with Trump, in terms of optics. 4 deputy mayors resigned yesterday. The government's not really functioning, and he's lost public support from not just the elites, but in private polling that I've seen, his approval rating is ridiculous. It's a lower approval rating.
You and I, we talk politics, and I'm just wondering, all that aside, I mean, I'm just asking both of you guys.
He'll scream about it, but again, it's not like his approval rating is 25% or 50%. His approval rating is like 10%.
Right. I'm sorry. So,
yes, but Sean, she will face blowback.
Scream. But there'll be no support for the blowback. The blowback will be from him. And
you don't think Al Sharpton comes out and says a thing? No.
But Mark, I agree. Al Sharpton won't. But I do think that, she may have a race herself, and her support with the black kind of machines of Brooklyn and Queens, it won't be maximum support for her. Like she will, there will be people who will defend him, just like people defended Nixon to the end.
She's just smart enough to know that her position on this could influence whether she's reelected or not, or elected or not. And I think her chances of being governor are not much better than Adams' chances of being mayor at this point. And this decision, you're right, Sean, it will hurt her with some groups. But again, his approval rating is so low that there's a limit to how much backlash there can be. And his ability to gin up support is pretty limited too. He can get 20 people to stand behind him at a rally, but that's about it right now.
Well, Sean, don't forget, she may face Richie Torres, and that has a dynamic in it in a Democratic primary, just as
Correct. All right, we're going to talk about Doge. We're going to talk about the Democratic Party, and we have Jim Kennedy, who just wrote a great Substack about that, with us to weigh in, and we'll talk about Mayor Adams. But real quick, do either of you want to say anything about the talks in Saudi, or do you want to just go straight to Doge?
Here's the one thing I'll just say. I think everybody, Dan's pointed this out about other things. In terms of the Democratic response. So this is more of a world response. At the end of the day, everybody's losing the big picture here, which is the goal should be whether or not we are ending the bloodshed and ending the war in a realistic fashion. And I get at the end of the day, the Ukrainians will have to agree to any framework that's sustainable. So put that aside. If these guys can further through these talks, peace and the end of killing, we should be for it. And everybody's worried about who's at the table and who's not. The bottom line is the goal should be, can we actually solve this in a peaceful way with the least amount of support to Russia or condoning the actions that they took? And it's so many people are worried about the process and not the end.
Yeah,
Amen. Dan?
Yeah, just kind of 3 quick things. I mean, one, it does appear the Europeans continue to be a complete mess. They had their emergency meeting, they're bickering, they didn't come to any sort of an agreement. So the idea that they should be at the table, it does kind of cause concern that they can't figure out what they're for and how they'll play a role. The second thing
it costs money to get to the table, and they need to look. If this isn't just about Ukraine, these guys haven't paid their NATO. Like, I feel
part of this is who's going to help defend Ukraine and enforce the peace. And it ultimately, I think, is going to have to be the Europeans, and that is causing consternation. You know, the Poles are like, we have to defend our own border, and the Germans are very nervous about sending troops into parts of Europe. Just 2 quickly other things. It is unprecedented what we apparently asked of Ukraine to pay us back. I mean, it almost reeks of like the end of World War I, where it was like, listen, Germany, you are going to pay us basically a whole lot of money for a very long time. And this is an ally of ours that we are asking, for just substantial amounts of money in terms of resources back. Not usually how you treat your friends in a negotiation. We put a lot on the line for them, so certainly something coming back our way, but what we asked for was historic. And the second is this report that supposedly we are not just negotiating with the Russians on Ukraine, but we are also negotiating for things that we would like from Russians, like access to their oil markets. And if that is true, and it was in the Wall Street Journal, no, wide-eyed liberals, that is concerning. I mean, that is basically like, we're negotiating for someone, they're not at the table, and oh, by the way, guys, what else can you do for us? Which would lead to the idea of, might we trade Ukraine away for our own interests? That's tough.
Right. There's lots of Doge stuff to talk about. And as we've said before, every day this program could just be an hour on Doge. 2 things I want to hit at least, and then if there's other stuff, you guys will bring it up too. One is, last night in a filing, the Justice Department on behalf of the White House said Elon Musk is not the head of Doge. He's barely got anything to do with Doge. He's an advisor to the president.
You don't even know the guy. Don't even know the guy.
doesn't know how to spell it. Sean, decode this. Why is the Justice Department making this argument?
Well, I think part of it is just they want to establish clear lines of authority, who has the ability to do what. As you send some of these folks in and give them the pushback is people don't have the authority, and there's certain lines of delineation that you want to prove to say this person works for this agency or it reports to this person who does, right? At the end of the day, the president of the United States is head of the executive branch. If somebody has the appropriate security clearances and whatever, then they have the authorization. That's what's needed. I mean, I find that the Dem pushback on this ridiculous. The president decides who has the authority, not he's the head of the executive branch. And so part of this, but what I found fascinating about the filing is the precedent that they cited. And again, this keeps coming up over and over again. You know who was a special government employee? Anita Dunn. Over and over and over again, who ran a big firm. I get it. It's not Elon size. I'm not trying to make that equivalency. But what I'm saying is they came into government. There are certain rules about what they call an SGE, a special government employee. It allows you to work a certain amount of days without a certain amount of disclosure, which is what, I had to file a public disclosure form stating everything that I owned, all the people I owed money to. And you have certain ways around that as a special government employee, but you're only entitled to certain things. And that's part of the filing. But again, this goes back to the thing. Biden brought Anita Dunn in, who had massive conflicts. Granted, again, I'm not making the equivalency, but they started the ball down and then kept refiling how they filed her to get around the disclosure reports because she still had clients. She has a familial conflict as well. And so the Biden administration did all this, and the Trump administration said, aha, here's our loophole. We'll just do it. And all these Democrats go, this is ridiculous. And I get it. It's an exponential blowing it up. But the bottom line is They did it. They exposed the hole. No one said a thing in the press or any leftist worried about Anita Dunn's conflicts of interest or their lack of disclosure. And suddenly Elon does it, much bigger, much more grand. And now they go, oh, this is ridiculous. He's not elected. Well, where was your concern when you guys started this and gave us the roadmap to do it? Sorry, Charlie.
Okay. Okay. So my friend Gordon, I never look at the chat, but my friend Gordon put in the chat about Anita. Okay. So Sean, I think, was extremely fair there. Okay. Elon's a lot richer than Anita, although Anita's pretty rich. A lot richer. But the concept is the same. The dynamic is the same. She was affiliated with a Washington firm that represented tons of clients with business before the government. And as Sean said, the media did not give, as Bill Clinton would say, a rip about their juggling of her title, so she could continue to make advice at the highest levels of the government in the White House. She could continue to do that with no press blowback, no scrutiny. Republicans didn't even try because they knew the press would not care, because Anita's very popular with the media. And now that Elon's doing it, it's like the biggest scandal of all time. Both should have been scrutinized. Okay. Musk should be scrutinized for all this. The answer for people in my business is not, well, Anita wasn't scrutinized, so Musk shouldn't have been. Anita should have been scrutinized. Dan.
Yeah, I was going to say, so just Anita Dunn was the communications director and kind of senior advisor to Biden, like not an insignificant person. And their firm is one of the largest public affairs, corporate affairs firms in the country. They still are today. She still is a part of the firm today. So yes, a precedent that, once again, as Sean points out, was set years ago. The one difference in the case of Mr. Musk is, I believe this is the fourth different definition they've given since November of his role, what his formal role is. He
doesn't have job lock. He's being promoted all over the place.
They are moving him around. It's like, hide the ball of disclosure and what he's going to be responsible for. So it always says, you got a problem when you keep changing your answer. So it seems like, because they have now put it in writing before the court, this is the final answer. We'll see next week if that is still the case. But certainly, it raises eyebrows.
But by the way, you know what I loved about one of the court pushbacks is the Democrats in one of the filings listed a bunch of media stories as the basis for standing, et cetera. And the court said you cannot use a media story as for standing. It was beautiful.
I think it was Judge Chutkan, who's the new hero of the Trump administration.
Tanya Chutkan.
If I were a law professor at Trump University, Ivanka Trump School of Law, I would be teaching a pop-up course on the creative arguments being made by the Justice Department and the White House counsel's office. So far, again, just technical proficiency, brilliant. All right, quick, because we want to get to the Democrats, but on Doge. Okay, so Doge is doing a lot of stuff in terms of firing people. And the two big things now that are getting a lot of coverage are firing people and getting access to information. Okay, on the firing front, David Ignatius, speaking for the Gang of 500, official spokesperson this morning on Morning Joe, explained how he sees the firings. 105, please.
What we're seeing across the government, it looks so new, but it's really the reimposition of what in the 19th century was called the spoils system, which means it's winner take all. If the president wins, he can fire everybody and put it in his own political loyalists, and there are no protections. And then we had reform. We had Teddy Roosevelt. That was his great issue, was we need clean government and we need a professional civil service. That's how we got his start. But you're seeing that idea wiped out as we return to a Trump-Musk spoil system with enormous cost for each of these agencies.
The most undercovered things that Donald Trump has accomplished politically for his party, his adopted party, is playing defense on Social Security, not taking it out of the Democratic arsenal completely, but taking it out more than any Republican presidential candidate has ever done by basically saying two parts. I'm not going to be the sucker who cut Social Security, so I'm just going to say that. And I'm going to say it so emphatically that the Democrats can't accuse me of that. And yet now, by sending Doge into Social Security, they are running the risk of giving Democrats their first big opening to say, Trump's going to take away your Social Security. Total demagoguery, probably, but they're doing it. Here's Stephen Miller, who loves to be seen as like a master communicator. Stephen Miller of the White House, Domestic Policy Advisor, 102, giving his personal assurance that Social Security record scrutiny is not about taking benefits away, but about stopping the Romanians from fraudulently obtaining benefits. 102, please.
What are the plans to do? What are the plans to do so if those records are obtained?
Well, as we know, there's a massive amount of fraud in this country. You have, for example, foreign fraud rings. These are foreign nationals who come into the United States. They use fake Social Security numbers. They use fake identities to steal billions in taxpayer benefits. There's no way to know until Doge gains full access exactly how much money we're talking about. But over a 10-year normal budget window, you could be talking about saving over $1 trillion by clamping down on massive fraud in our tax and entitlement systems, including, again, those carried out by organized fraud and theft rings. A very important point in all this is to understand that Doge are subordinate staffers of the federal government. They are political appointees, just like me, just like everyone else in the White House, that serve and answer to the president. So we're not talking about an outside private entity. We're talking about the existing federal staff of the federal government performing their statutory and constitutional duty.
All right. So, Dan, on these two issues of firings and of access to Social Security records, as well as IRS records, are Republicans finally walking into self-made traps where public opinion will turn against Doge?
Well, we'll see. On the firing, look, it is true. I mean, this is what Trump is moving towards, which is a kind of, rewarding your allies with patronage is what they used to call it. And maybe that is the correct answer. I mean, we've tried the kind of professional bureaucracy for close to 100 years now. The public is frustrated and wants change. We're going to see what this new government, kind of what comes of Doge and what comes of all these firings, and the public will render a judgment. It could be that they'll want to go back to, something closer to what Teddy Roosevelt, and here in New York, it was Tammany Hall and all the corruption that New York had, years ago that they've tried to change. So I think on the firings, we'll see, but the public seems supportive of what Trump is trying to do, and there's not a lot of crying for the bureaucracy. I think when it comes to Social Security, healthcare, I've written about this a few times on Substack recently. USAID was the easy part. Now you're going to entitlements, things that people rely on for their everyday life. And I think Stephen Miller is right. Social Security and tax filings are full of fraud. I've lobbied on that issue for years. Organized crime, filing false returns to steal refunds is a real issue. No offense to Doge, that's been known for 10 years. It's been debated. The answer is more money to the IRS and better software. The algorithms are what catch it, not people. And by the way, Republicans in these reconciliation bills want to slash IRS funding by billions of dollars. Like there's great irony. Look, ultimately, this is going to come down to Twitter versus the real world. Right? On Twitter right now, it is all cheerleading for Doge and for Musk. In the real world, you are beginning to hear complaints of, wait a second, why is this service on hold? Why are there changes? If phone calls aren't answered, if buildings are closed, that's when you're going to see the real world. All politics is local. Politicians will respond to voters because they're up for re-election soon. Trump and Musk never is, Trump is not anymore. So we're going to see how people feel about all these changes as it touches their life.
Is the president running a risk on Social Security?
I had so much to say until Dan said Stephen Miller is right. And then I just thought, I don't know that I want to. As long as, look, I think the way they're selling this is right. If instead of saying we're touching it, they're saying we're trying to get rid of the fraud in it, and they've gone out and forward sold that, right? That's what you're hearing the president talk about, Elon talk about, Stephen Miller. And as long as people are saying, oh, they're just getting rid of fraud, that's great. And so if they can effectively sell that right now, get out in front of the issue before they ever touch it and say, here's how many people are stealing Dead people are getting Social Security. Fraudulent people are getting Social Security. Foreigners are getting Social Security. And get that into the narrative of in the bloodstream, they're going to be fine. If the hit, and this is why I'm amazed. I mean, Democrats have to find that balance of not defending fraud and waste and saying, hey, you're going to touch the third rail. So I think that I give the president and these guys a lot of credit about getting out in front of what they're doing and getting people to just say, oh, no, that's not what they're doing. They're just going after the bad stuff. They're not actually touching benefits. That's the smart way to sell this. Secondly, when it comes to access, the thing that I have found interesting, and I mentioned this a moment ago, access is determined by the higher authority, right? I mean, it's from the highest levels of security clearances all the way down to the smallest in government. If these people have been given the authority to do that, and in some cases, if it's sensitive information, do they have the background clearance or whatever, then they do. That's a fact. No one's actually arguing that Bobby, who's going into the Social Security office, doesn't have the appropriate clearances. They just don't like it. Why are they defending that? That's what I think Republicans should push back more and say, why are you guys defending us going in and looking at books where we know there's waste, fraud, abuse, et cetera, happening? And then the last thing I would just say is, overall, the tone of these guys is what's happening. Yes, Dan's right. There's a little snipping happening at the bottom. But for the most part, they are forward selling all of these ridiculous programs and the inefficiencies in government. Elon posted this thing last night about how the Treasury Department fails to use basic accounting codes to determine which budget line item things are adjusted to. I think most people look at that and say that's insane. So as long as they keep selling it that way, and there's so far yet to be a single concrete example that Democrats have united around to say, wow, they've overstepped, they're going to have a problem.
But the only thing I would add, Sean, to what you said that was going to create a problem is the next shoe to drop is $2.5 trillion in cuts that Republicans are about to put on the table as part of reconciliation. So you're slashing the government, you're firing all these people. In a normal reorg of a company, after the this is what the new iteration looks like. Here's why it's still going to be efficient and effective to making our widget, so to speak. Well, instead, what's going to come is we're going to cut $2.5 trillion and more people and more services. And that is where I think the problem is going to come for Republicans, or the public is going to ask, what is the new iteration of government that you guys ultimately want to get to? Musk and Trump don't want to talk about that because I don't think they know. Right now, they love the headline.
Frank Luntz used to explain it this way. He'd say that there's 3 elements to getting somebody on your side: value, goal, solution. So you have to get people to buy into the value of what you're doing, which is what they're doing. There's a ton of waste, all these inefficiencies, blah, blah, blah. Then what's the goal? The goal is to reform government to make it more efficient. And then you present a solution. And if you can get people to get on board on the first 2, when you go to present them the solution, here's what you need to do to fix that. They're already saying to you, gosh, you're right, because you've explained to me the value of what we're doing, the goal that we're trying to achieve, and now I'm with you on the solution. And I think the Trump administration so far has done brilliantly the first 2. So when they get to the proposition, here's why reconciliation, which we'll call it something else, is the answer, people are like, yeah, well, you guys have told us there's all this waste, fraud, and abuse, so we're on board. If they continue to sell this, and where politicians in the past have made a mistake is they jump to the solution too quick. And they tell people, we're doing this, and here's the thing. And people go, wait a second, I didn't know that was the deal. So where these guys are buttering up everyone is every day you're seeing these Doge accounts put out, here's all this crap that you're funding through your tax dollars, and people are getting outraged. When I talk to people, literally, whether it's an Uber driver or a person, I go, hey, have you heard what's going on? Yeah. And they've heard some example. And that's it, is that right now, as long as I believe that you're ripping me off and that all this money's getting wasted, I'm like, great, do what you have to, fix it.
Sorry, there's 2 things happening simultaneously that are directionally good for Democrats. I don't know how they'll sustain. I don't know how big they'll become. One is there's more Republican complaints this week about Doge, about the Ukraine policy, about the Middle East. There's just more people being willing to, Republicans on the Hill, mostly Senate, but some House, being willing to criticize the president. And then on the Democratic side, we saw protests yesterday, and we're seeing people feel a little bit more energized. So let me play 2 things from that. First, 103, this is Kelly O'Donnell on NBC chronicling, you may or may not know because it didn't get much coverage, protests around the country yesterday on President's Day against the Trump administration.
Protests across the country, turning this President's Day holiday into a day of action. From the winter chill of Albany to sunshine in Orlando. We win! The West Coast to the nation's capital.
But the people are going to feel it eventually.
So this is hundreds, in some cases close to thousands, not tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands, but it's activity and action. This is James Carville on MSNBC last night. This is going to be 104, saying, let the grassroots flourish, and the Democratic politicians who've not proven themselves particularly good in this moment, let them stay out of the way. 104, please.
We're seeing signs and protesters saying, James, this is not even what people voted for. Even if they are anti-Trump voters, they're calling out a lot of things that they say exceed the president's authority or are dangerous or are gutting of the federal government. What's happening here? What do you see?
What I see is something organic coming up from around the country. I don't think that there was a lot of organization. If you remember, in 2017, you had like 1 million women on the mall. This is happening all around the country. So the question is, how should Democratic politicians respond to this? And what I think they should do is what we call in rural America, play possum. Just let it go. Don't get in the way of it. Or as we like to say, don't just stand there, do nothing.
All right, so let's bring in Jim Kennedy, longtime Democratic strategist, who, amongst other things, worked with Joe Lieberman. What happened to Jim Kennedy? He was right there.
Yeah, he was on.
Hold on.
He got doged.
No, he's here. I don't know. He's turned off his camera. Jim, are you there? Jim Kennedy, can you turn on your camera? I don't know what happened. He had his hand up, camera on. There he is. All right, Jim Kennedy, unmute. Welcome in. As I said, you worked with Joe Lieberman. Other Democrats worked in the Clinton White House. And you wrote in your Substack recently, a Substack I recommend to all, about what you think the Democrats should do in this moment. Can you explain your point of view, sir, and welcome in. Thank you for joining.
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I agree in part with James Carville. I think Democrats really the leaders need to take a sabbatical and take several months to really analyze their message and figure out their messengers. I disagree somewhat with the grassroots issue because I think the protests so far have been against the 3 Ds, Doge, DEI, and deportations, and all three so far enjoy public support. So I think they're sort of on the wrong side of that electoral history, although Dan may be right. Over time, there may be sort of a coalescing of concern around some of those cuts. But I looked at history. If you look back to 1988 to 1991, after the Democrats got beat for the third time in a row, they really sort of looked inward and made changes and came up with the DLC, and my old bosses, Bill Clinton and Joe Lieberman, were part of that. And they didn't waste time bashing George Bush. They really crafted a positive message. And I went back and looked at Bill Clinton's speech in Cleveland to the DLC in May of 1991, when George Bush was very popular. If you look at that speech, he didn't mention Bush by name once. And then later in the year, in October, he announced his campaign for president. He only mentioned him twice, and once was to say, let's not engage in Bush bashing. It's not productive. Instead, he laid out a theme for his campaign, which he stuck to, and he laid out specific ideas, which were very positive in tone. And he also made clear that he was not your typical Democrat. He talked about welfare reform. He talked about police on the streets. He talked about abortion being rare. He talked about choice in education. So I think those kinds of messages need to be developed, and that takes time. I think they shouldn't waste time bashing Trump. I think that's kind of a useless thing.
Dan, question for Jim.
I mean, amen. He's absolutely right. Jim, the only piece I would add is you do want your base energized and engaged. And, it is right now relatively small, but you are seeing signs of life. So I would think, how would you recommend the party try to harness this while, as you say, figuring out what it's for going into the midterms in 2028?
Well, I think one problem for the party compared to 1989 is that the interest groups are more embedded in the party than they were back then. So it was easier for Clinton to sort of separate himself, from Jesse Jackson and some parts of the party. But nowadays they're sort of integrated into the bureaucracy of the party. So it is going to be, you could have a schism develop if they take on those interest groups too directly. But I think the right messenger has to come along and take that fight. There has to be a bit of a civil war before they can get beyond this problem.
The
Well,
only thing I don't
do is you have social media. I mean, now they have a megaphone. They can almost drag you places, just like the Trump base sometimes drags him places. And so that's a additional dynamic.
Yeah.
the only quibble I'd make is I think the CIO was pretty integrated into the party back in Bill Clinton's day.
Yeah.
Maybe there are more groups now, but I think they were more integrated back then, and they were a pretty big force. And Bill Clinton took them on with Right to Work, took them on with
Yeah, that's
NAFTA.
right. Yeah, he was
Sean.
very pro-business.
Yeah, Sean.
I just wonder, it seems to me as though the party for the last 10 years has focused more of its efforts on being anti-Trump than pro-something. And so if you have a candidate, I just feel like, at least what I'm hearing you say, is somebody needs to come along and formulate their own, like, here's where I think, as opposed to just being like, I'm the best person to take on Trump, here's my vision of how to move America forward. Is that an accurate?
Yeah, and Trump's not going to be on the ballot in either 2 years or 4 years, so it's a kind of waste of time to focus too much. It's just like Reagan. Reagan was off the ballot. It's no time. There's no sense wasting time on that. And so I think that's useless energy to. And also, you need to win over some of those Trump voters. You're not going to win them over by attacking the guy they voted for. So
I think Governor Shapiro is to some extent doing this. I think Ro Khanna is to some extent doing this. But it does take discipline, and it does take the communication skills to delight and dazzle and energize the crowd when you're not feeding them Orange Man bad, which, as Sean said, and you said, for 10 years, that's the way you've touched the political erogenous zones of the base. You've said Trump's horrible. Here, let me outdo people and tell you how horrible Trump is. And it's a lot to flip and say, get excited about what I'm talking about. And as you said, Bill Clinton didn't even mention Bush. And when he did, because I covered his campaign in '92, when he did, it was more with humor and with sorrow rather than animosity or hostility. And I think you're right, that still would work. Jim, if people want to read your Substack, go ahead, Dan.
Mark, the only thing I would disagree with you and Jim about here in terms of that approach, Clinton could do it because George H.W. Bush was not going to punch down in 1991, 1990 to one of the seven dwarfs, right? They belittled them. They let them all scramble around. Trump and MAGA rejoices in beating the hell out of anyone whose head emerges above water. And so I think one problem is it's going to be really hard to motivate people when the incoming, like the base wants to see that you have kahunas, that you're nimble, that you can take a punch, throw a punch, and have a positive message. But I don't think it's possible to you have to move on from them while confronting them. And that is going to be very hard.
I think really what's going to matter is what's happening with the economy and the world in 2 years from now. And that's going to spell more. I mean, Trump's placing a lot of big bets right now. It could be crazy or it could be smart. And we're going to know in a year or two, is the inflation rate up? Is the crime rate down? Are we more at peace or less at peace around the world? Those are going to be the measures that really tell the tale of what happens.
All right, two things before you go, Jim. Thank you so much. One, people want to read your Substack. What's it called?
Kennedy Kantz, and it's in the, I put a link in the chat to this particular topic.
Link in the chat and Kennedy Kantz. Last question, Dan, then Sean, then Jim. It is September of 2026, and you're in a contested general election fight for your congressional seat or your Senate seat. And you can bring you can reserve the time today of one living Democratic politician to come in and do a fundraiser for you and do a rally for you. Who do you book today? Who do you book? Dan.
And you're a contested race, you said.
Yes, you're in a contested race with a tough general election fight in either a purple state or a purple congressional district. Who do you book today? You got to get time on their schedule today. Who do you book?
Yeah, it's easy. John Fetterman.
Sean.
Barack Obama.
Oh. You're supposed to help the Democrats, Sean, not hurt the Democrats.
Jim.
I would say Fetterman too. He's sort of he's the it guy right now.
Yep, today.
The irony that only Sean got the answer correct. It's still Barack Obama. Jim, thank you. Come back regularly.
If you guys need any more help for the Democratic Party, give me a call.
It's Barack Obama. You got to raise the money. Jim, please come back regularly. We love having you on.
Do you think he's still really popular on the fundraising tour after this summer?
Yeah. I'm not saying it'll be true in 2 years, but if I got to reserve his time now, I'm booking Barack Obama.
Okay.
Maybe
That's my thing. Fetterman maybe popular
Michelle.
today. Is he popular?
Yeah, it's too big a risk. All right, Eric, welcome in. Thank you for joining. Tell folks who don't have to unmute. Tell folks who don't know where you are, what all those messy papers are behind you, and what's on your mind. But first, you got to unmute.
Oh, it's me. Okay.
Yes,
thanks.
sir.
Let's see what's on my mind.
No, first tell us where you are and what all those papers are.
I'm in Newton, Massachusetts. All those papers are financial stuff. I'm an investment manager.
Awesome.
Although I didn't that long ago graduate from law school at the age of 55.
Congratulations. As Rick Perry would say, muzzle tough.
Thanks a lot. I had a couple of issues. One, I've always been very concerned about the debt ceiling. I think it's, I think it's an anachronism, and it gives the minority party leverage. And I know back in 2011 they had this idea of minting a platinum coin for $1 trillion. I guess this was back when $1 trillion was a lot of money. And I'm not sure why it didn't go forward. I think it was just political. It just didn't look good. But I'm wondering, and this is really for Sean, because he obviously has some connections to the Trump administration. I was wondering if the IRS could allow people to prepay their taxes for 2026, 2027, 2028 at a discount, which is really economically equivalent to issuing debt, but it would get around the debt ceiling and give the Republicans a way of pushing back on the Democrats' use of the debt ceiling as leverage in negotiations. So the idea is the IRS allows corporations and even individuals to prepay their taxes at a discount. And if you can make those as tax credits, so you could represent them as tax credits that are negotiable, then it would actually be economically equivalent to issuing treasury bills.
Eric, has any government ever done this, to your knowledge?
I don't know of any. No.
Okay. Sean, what do you think?
I think it's an interesting idea. One, I don't know about the legality of it. I don't think the IRS has the authority to do that without some kind of congressional mandate to do it or legal authority to do it. Secondly, my fear government-wise is that the second you give the government any additional money, they'll spend it and then figure out how to they don't know how to, the track record doesn't speak well for itself. When you look at entitlement.
But the spending is already, the spending is authorized by Congress already. The debt ceiling is just
correct, but all you're doing is snowballing the problem. Is that now 2 years from now you're going to need more money to pay for the spend. I get it. And I'm probably just not financially. I'm sure there's somebody who can sit down and do the equivalency of how many. What makes the most sense. Do we pay the current debt now so we don't have to pay the interest on it? I don't know. That's probably not. I'm probably not the best person to ask about that. But I also do question the legality of it. And part of the reason that I love what Doge is doing is because too often Washington figures out how to spend the money in more creative ways than eliminate the spending in permanent ways. So I get what you're doing, and I think it's noble. I feel like I would rather spend more time trying to figure out how to get rid of and end government spending and growth than figure out how to assuage the spending problem.
Dan.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it would be a challenge because, look, let's say company X made $1 million this year. So, and the corporate rate was whatever, 25%, and you prepaid at 22.5. And in 2 years, you make $1 billion. Now, so you would be paying, wouldn't they still owe tax because 2 years later?
Yeah, you just got to pay the difference, but you're paying at least what you paid.
Right, yeah. Right. But that's where, just like a lot of schools won't let you prepay tuition for years in advance, like apartment buildings won't let you prepay for years. There are too many variables as the world changes.
It's just like paying your quarterly taxes. If you end up owing more, you pay more. If you end up owing less, you get a refund.
But that's because the system has allowed for 1 year's worth of, okay, this is going to be the rules for the year. No, I'm just saying the IRS would have issues because they can't foresee what's out there. So they would be, you would be responsible for coming back, filing another return, and disclosing all the variables that have changed to allow for your, I mean, I just think, again, IRS would need more money. They'd need new someone would have to write the software. Like, it just creates another layer of burden on the IRS.
Eric, I love your idea so much. I'm going to send in 3 years worth of payments in January and April.
Oh, you have to get a discount.
Yeah. One more question. I'll factor that in. What question, sir? One more question. Did you say you had a second question?
Just to give an idea on the Doge. I mean, I think there's 3 categories of waste. There's one where you're essentially paying people to do nothing, or just giving people money for nothing, and that's just like dropping money out of helicopters, and it's bad for inflation, but it doesn't actually waste resources. The second is paying people to do nothing, which is a waste because they could be doing something productive. And the third thing, which is the worst thing, and I think this was USAID, was that paying people to actually hamper the productivity of other people. And that's wasting resources to destroy even more resources. And I think that's what Doge really should be focusing on, because I think the government does quite a lot of that.
Eric, thank you. That's good. Thank you. Really appreciate it. Thank you for coming in. Please come back regularly. Hector, welcome in. Tell folks who don't know where you are, what's on your mind after you unmute, please.
Wow.
There you go.
Thank you for taking my turn here. I really appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
A little nervous. Forgive me.
Relax. Sean and I are very nice. Dan is a little bit of a jerk, but we'll protect you. So dive right in. Just take your time.
I love Dan's style, man. That guy can dress. Well, I'm calling from Covina, California, and I have a question. As far as, I'm not a very educated person. I'm pretty much educated by the hard knocks of life, pretty much, is what I like to tell my kids.
It's the very best school there is, sir.
I have a thing about learning in the past 4 years. Ever since COVID, or 5 years, ever since COVID, I had a lot of time learning about politics, trying to learn about politics, not very educated in it. But all this money that Doge is finding, why didn't our government not utilize that money for Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare? I mean, I understand there's worldly things that need to be taken care of and everything, but I just kind of feel like, shouldn't it be staying at home and kind of helping people?
Yeah, brilliant question, Hector. Brilliant. There's lots of ways to answer it. Dan, take the first crack at it. But you're right on point, and I'll say again what I say almost every day. You're speaking for tens of millions of people with that question. Dan.
Absolutely, Hector. It's so obvious that nobody did it. I think the answer is the budget is so big, trillions of dollars. And members of Congress over the years stuff in little parochial pet issues on the committees that they serve on. So again, I'm going to come back to this because it's the headline, $50 million for condoms in Mozambique or wherever it was, right? Somebody had the idea that there was a reason for it. Maybe AIDS was out of control, or HIV, and they're very passionate about life expectancy in Africa, right? Just to be charitable here. And it piles up and it piles up. And everybody says in Washington, boy, there's so much wasteful spending. It's terrible. We have debt and deficit. But by the way, here's my new pet project. We're not going to cut. We're just going to add and add and add and add. And Trump, to his credit, and Musk are the first people to stand up and just say, time out. This is appalling how much of this there is. And we are going to highlight it and shame people into kind of, supporting us. The challenge is what Doge is doing so far is really just nicking around the edges of 1 to 2% of spending. Ultimately, they're going to have to go towards things like the Department of Defense and places where, 20, 30% of spending lies. But to your point, it is embarrassing as a Democrat, and I think even amongst Republicans, that nobody had the courage or the balls to put this on the table. Because if I highlighted your spending, you were going to highlight mine. So it was mutually assured destruction. So everyone said, don't do it.
So there's 2 pieces to this. First of all, it's an absolutely great question because it touches on so much of how our government operates. So there's Dan did a great job of explaining the congressional piece of this. There's earmarks for a variety of reasons. Somebody at some point thought they were doing something good, or frankly, and sometimes, so there's a good chunk of it that's good. I want to help alleviate a problem, and I believe this is the best way to do it. I may totally disagree with it, but then there's the other part of the congressional thing, which is I have a contractor in my district who wants to take over this thing. And so I'm going to help them get it. Then there's the agency piece of this. So in the last decade plus, more and more of what Congress has done is given, and so remember, just to give you some background, for the longest time, it became a dirty word to say the word earmark, which was that a member of Congress said, this spending, this $10 million, I'm going to earmark it for this project, this agency, this whatever, right? Because I want this money to go whatever. That became a dirty word in Washington for a long time, because a lot of examples where my donor, my friend is getting this. So they the Republican conference on the House side basically made a rule that said you can't earmark money. What happened when that happened? Well, they gave money to the agencies and said, here's your $1 billion USAID, you go appropriate it. Maybe we'll lobby you, but then you get to decide. So then some bureaucrat said, oh, I think that, in Dan's case, alleviating AIDS or some life expectancy problems in Mozambique or wherever, and my solution to do this is X. Or some dude comes in, and this is a whole, again, like webinar that we could do on this. But there's all these set-asides that exist in federal contracting, Alaskan Native corporations, veterans. It goes like there's a whole list. And the system is gamed like you wouldn't believe. And it's amazing how this town works, where there are people who literally become the face of a company or a corporation to bid on projects up to X dollars because they have a federal set-aside that they get certain preferences in contracting, et cetera. So the system has gotten gamed so bad. And the broader point that is important at the end is finally somebody is saying, okay, guys, I'm going to blow the whistle on it. I'm going to expose it. And that's what we need to have happen. And it's a shame it hasn't happened before, but at least Musk and Trump are doing it now.
Hector, any follow-up questions?
Yeah, just a secondary. To add on to that, do you think now that these funds are being found, do you think there's a chance maybe, hey, people will wake up and start directing some of this money that was just like the condemnation? That money, that's what, $50 million? That's $50 million can go into Social Security or you can go to Medicaid, whatever. Do you see it? As
well, just remember, we're $36 trillion in debt. We spend in excess of $2 trillion more than we take in every year. We spend more on interest on the debt than we do on our national defense. So before we even start spending the money, we basically need to just stop the bleeding. We spend $2 trillion a year more than we take in, which adds to our national defense, our national debt. So I get your point. It's well taken. There's roads and bridges and all sorts of defense projects that we could do. But to Dan's point, I will just say this: keep hunting, Elon. I don't have any. As far as I'm concerned, go to the Pentagon, open all 5 sides up, and go on in, because there's a ton there too. And everything that I enumerated that's part of the problem is on steroids at the Pentagon and the State Department.
Hector, how did you?
Yes.
Go ahead, Dan.
I was lost in all of this. Is this money is appropriated by Congress? The idea that it's fraud. So the question for you, or for going forward, is: does Congress change its habits? Does Elon Musk and everyone shine a light on how Congress appropriates money? What is in these budgets that are thousands and thousands of pages? If that, then you're bending the curve. Otherwise, people say for 2 years, it's like earmarks. For a decade, we'll just keep it quiet. We'll not really have them. But we're all in agreement we're going to bring earmarks back. So what did they do 2 years ago or 4 years ago? They brought earmarks back. So if Congress changes, you'll see real change. But this is bipartisan. This is not just Democrats. Some of the most powerful appropriators in the country are Republicans. We'll see.
It also hasn't been a priority. Like the reality is that when you're running for re-election in a campaign, whether you're a Republican or Democrat, you go out in September of an election year and you say, I got you this. No one goes home and says, guess what? How much fraud I uncovered. No one cares. I hate to say this, but that doesn't poll well. And so finally, having this administration expose it where they have to kind of cower a little and go, yeah, me too. But for all these members of Congress that are running on the Hill saying, we should be doing, it's like, you did nothing. And so I think that this is, again, I'm glad it's happening. I think it's about time. But just to Dan's point, the system is fundamentally broken.
And we'll see.
Hector, how did you find two-way, and what do you like about it?
What I love about it is I'm learning. I'm learning a lot. That's just the fact for me is, like I said, I'm not a school person, never was, but I've just been it's been really hard, ever since the last 4 years. So trying to learn is making me feel a lot better, understanding of what's going on, out there. I guess the Social Security thing is real strong with me is because my in-laws lost their senior home because the rent just kept going up. So, we had to find a way to take them in and help them out and do some stuff. So, but when I listen to you guys, I think you guys are awesome. I mean, you guys are like, you guys are the best teachers, to be honest with you. I mean, for someone like me, I should say, I don't get too much time, but I watch both shows. I watch in the morning, watch in the evening. Sean, I watch you later, and after it's all done.
I appreciate that. You can watch me whenever you want. Thank you.
Dan Turrentine did a show too. I think he's great.
Yeah, Hector, very grateful to you. Love having you as part of the community, and please come back on a regular basis. Okay.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Hector.
Thank you.
Well done.
And of course, Hector, starting tomorrow night, there's a new show for you to watch. Meghan McCain, our new colleague at Two-Way, 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Meghan McCain's Happy Hour will debut. And so that'll be added to the menu. If you want to be part of the conversation for people like Hector who have figured out how to get directly on the Two-Way platform to be able to ask live interactive questions, go to tway.tv/Meghan, and you can sign up to receive notification of the link to come right on. And of course, it'll stream live on X and on YouTube like this program does and our other programs.
Mark, to Hector's point, I don't mean to toot our own horn, but one of the things that I do think, aside from the format that's unique about this, is that we've all been in the game. And one of the things that frustrates the heck out of me when I watch cable is seeing people called a Republican strategist that have never strategized on anything Republican, been on a campaign, worked on the Hill, worked in government. And obviously, pundits are great. I love hearing other people's opinions. But I think for the beauty of this platform and the people who come on, and I think Hector was a perfect example of this, is that understanding our government, how it works from the inside out, there is a value to that. It's one thing to shout at the rooftops, which a lot of people on the right and the left do. But understanding how to affect change is important, because if you are upset or you like something for that matter, being able to know who to channel that to or how to make change matters. And I think what we do every morning is something so unique and different that nobody else offers, with 5-minute little cable segments where they're yelling at each other.
Chris Taylor, Ken Schultz, why aren't you nodding vociferously at what Sean is saying? Yeah, there you go. Okay, thank you. We did a special episode that was a job fair. What you just said, Sean, makes me think we're going to do an episode, maybe here, maybe it'll be a special called "No Question Too Stupid" or something like that. In other words, we want to be able people to feel free to ask anything they want, even some basics about government. You do have Google, but as Sean suggested, Sean and Dan are an extraordinary resource and a unique resource in terms of making themselves available to answer questions. So let's think about doing that at some point soon, because I think probably there are people who don't ask questions because they're too basic, or maybe they think everybody else on here knows. And I know there are tons of questions. In fact, there are questions I would ask you guys that I don't know the answer to, but I'm a little embarrassed. But on that episode, I feel free. All right. Lots of hands up. I apologize for not getting to more people, but those were great questions. I'll be on at 6 o'clock tonight, and for Two-Way Tonight, come back for that. Then tomorrow, Sean, Dan, and I will be back at 9 a.m. And then tomorrow night, again, I told you just now, Meghan's show debut. Super excited about it. You're going to want to make that program live or on demand part of your day as well. And Meghan will have lots of great guests, lots of great discussion, and as always on Two-Way, questions from the community. Then at 6 o'clock tomorrow night, I'm doing a special live focus group with our partners at Look, young people, 18 to 30, with strong opinions about Elon Musk, how they thought about him before Doge, how they think about him now. Really interesting group of folks. We've talked to them in advance to kind of get a general sense of their point of view. Some are pro-Trump, some did not vote for Trump. So join tomorrow night, 6 o'clock Eastern Time for that. Those are all your coming attractions. Any word, Paul, out of Riyadh, except for hotel prices before we go? Or Noah, anybody got any Riyadh news?
No new news. Check
No new
Travelocity
news.
for details
All
for
right.
hotels.
Yeah. So tonight,
I wrote, by the way, I know we got a lot of questions. Well, Dan and I talked about this yesterday. We asked about this last week. I wrote an entire column today at SeanSpicer.com that'll go out later. Everyone can get it's free about the background on this AP banning, quote unquote, from the White House. So if you want to understand, I kind of just give the White House perspective. I mean, obviously, I explained the AP side of this as well, but if you want to know why I think the White House is doing what they're doing and some insight into the AP, I sort of wrote about it all today. It's free, so go take a look.
all right, I'm going to repost it on my site, but I'm going to charge for it. Thank you all for watching. Thank you all for watching. Update at 6 o'clock tonight on Riyadh, on Mayor Adams and what's going on there. I predict there'll be some movement on that. And then, of course, President Trump's executive order signing at 4, which I suspect will produce some news as well. So all of that and much, 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 much more, 6 p.m. tonight, and the three of us will see at 9 a.m. Thanks to Mr. Kennedy and the others and Eric and others who asked questions, and Hector. We'll see you tomorrow, 9 a.m. Eastern time. I'll see you tonight at 6. Have a great day.